Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air shift before a single word was spoken? Not dramatically, not obviously, but subtly, as if something invisible tightened between you. And then you notice him. He straightens slightly. His jaw clenches. He looks at you just for a second too long and then quickly looks away. Nothing happened, and yet everything happened. What if the divine masculine feels the connection in his body long before he allows himself to understand it emotionally? What if the reason he sometimes pulls away isn't because he doesn't feel anything but because he feels too much? Tonight, we're going to explore something rarely discussed in the twin flame journey. Not the poetic side, not the spiritual quotes, not the romantic fantasy, but the physical reality. Because when the divine masculine feels a deep energetic pull toward you, it doesn't always show up as confession. It often shows up as tension, silence, distance, intensity he doesn't know how to name. And that's where things become confusing. You may think, if he feels this connection, why doesn't he say it? If the chemistry is real, why does he retreat? If this is a divine connection, why does it feel so chaotic? But here's a deeper question. What if his body already knows and his ego is still trying to catch up? The twin flame dynamic is often described as spiritual, energetic, soul-based. And yes, it is. But energy doesn't float somewhere abstract. Energy moves through the nervous system, through breath, through muscle tension, through heartbeat. When two twin flames come into proximity, especially in the early stages, the connection doesn't just awaken feelings. It activates the body. And for the divine masculine, who is often conditioned to suppress vulnerability, control emotion and maintain composure, that activation can feel destabilizing. Because he may not understand what is happening. He may not have language for it. He may not even consciously admit that he feels it. But his body reacts. You might notice it in small ways. A shift in posture when you approach. A sudden stillness when your eyes meet. A subtle change in breathing. Or maybe it's more dramatic. He becomes overly serious, overly calm, or strangely distant, right after a moment of closeness. And that's the paradox. The stronger the pull, the more confusing the behavior. We've been taught to interpret attraction in simple terms. If someone likes you, they move closer. If someone feels chemistry, they pursue. If someone wants you, they make it obvious. But the twin flame connection doesn't operate like ordinary attraction. It doesn't feel casual. It doesn't feel optional. It doesn't feel safe. It feels inevitable. And inevitability can be terrifying. Because when the divine masculine feels a deep physical pull toward you, it isn't just about desire. It's about recognition. It's about the body responding to something ancient, familiar, almost remembered. And when recognition hits the nervous system before the mind can rationalize it, the result isn't always romance. Sometimes it's resistance. Sometimes it's withdrawal. Sometimes it's confusion so intense that he convinces himself it's nothing at all. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt him react to you before he even realized he was reacting? Maybe he enters a room and instantly scans for you. Maybe he stands slightly closer than necessary. Maybe he avoids eye contact right after holding it too long. Maybe you feel the charge in the silence between you. No words, but undeniable electricity. That electricity is not imagination. It's polarity. It's the energetic exchange between masculine and feminine fields when they resonate at the same frequency. And here's the part most people don't talk about. For the divine masculine, this pull can feel like loss of control. His body responds before he chooses to respond. His nervous system activates before he decides to engage. And that activation can trigger fight or flight. Yes, even in love. Especially in love. Because the twin flame connection doesn't just offer pleasure. It threatens identity. It exposes vulnerability. It awakens dormant emotion. Imagine being someone who has learned to maintain composure your entire life. To stay logical. To stay grounded. To stay self-contained. And then suddenly, one person destabilizes your internal balance without even trying. Your heartbeat shifts. Your breath changes. Your focus narrows. You feel drawn physically, almost magnetically. Not in a desperate way, but in a way that feels involuntary. That's powerful. And power without understanding can feel dangerous. So what does the divine masculine often do? He analyzes. He rationalizes. He distances. He tells himself it's just attraction, or just chemistry, or just projection. But the body doesn't lie. The body recognizes resonance. And sometimes it recognizes it before the soul consciously names it. That's why this video is important. Because many people misinterpret his physical reactions. They assume disinterest when he withdraws. They assume indifference when he avoids intensity. They assume rejection when he becomes guarded. But what if those reactions are signs of overwhelm? What if his tension is actually evidence of depth? What if the silence is not absence but integration? You see, when the divine masculine feels a deep physical pull toward you, it doesn't always look romantic at first. Can look awkward. It can look restrained. Can look confusing. But beneath that surface behavior is something primal. Something ancient. A magnetic recognition that doesn't require explanation. And in the twin flame journey, that recognition is rarely smooth. It disrupts patterns. It exposes shadows. It ignites dormant parts of the self. And for someone who has learned to live from control rather than surrender, that ignition can feel like chaos. So as we move into the 9 unusual signs, I want you to hold this awareness. Not all distance is detachment. Not all silence is absence. Not all tension is rejection. Sometimes the body reacts because the soul remembers. And sometimes the divine masculine feels the truth physically long before he allows himself to feel it emotionally. So ask yourself, have you noticed moments when his body seemed to speak louder than his words? Have you felt that magnetic pull even when nothing was said? Have you sensed that something deeper was happening beneath the surface? If you have, you're not imagining it. You may simply be witnessing the early stages of awakening. Because when the divine masculine feels a deep physical pull toward you, the journey has already begun, even if he hasn't admitted it yet. Before we move into the 9 unusual signs, we need to understand something essential. The twin flame connection is not just emotional. It is not just spiritual. And it is definitely not just romantic. It is neurological. When the divine masculine feels a deep physical pull toward you, his nervous system activates before his mind has time to interpret what's happening. And this is where everything begins to make sense. Because many people assume that when a man feels something intense, he immediately identifies it as attraction or love. But in reality, especially in twin flame dynamics, intensity doesn't register as romance at first. It registers as stimulation, overstimulation, and sometimes even threat. Let's talk about why. The nervous system is wired for survival first, connection second. When something feels unfamiliar, powerful, and beyond conscious control, the body doesn't ask, "Is this love?" It asks, "Is this safe?" Now imagine the divine masculine, someone who may have spent years mastering emotional restraint, logic, independence, and self-control. He meets you, and suddenly, without warning, his heart rate changes. His breathing becomes shallow. His body temperature shifts. His muscles tighten. His focus sharpens. He feels drawn toward you physically, almost magnetically, but he doesn't understand why. That doesn't feel romantic. Feels destabilizing. Because when the twin flame polarity activates, it stimulates the autonomic nervous system, specifically the sympathetic response. That's the same system responsible for fight or flight. Yes, the same system. So when you feel the chemistry, the electricity, the magnetic charge, what you're actually witnessing is nervous system activation. And here's the paradox. The stronger the attraction, the stronger the activation. For the divine masculine, this can feel like a sudden tension in the body, increased alertness, a heightened awareness of you, a difficulty maintaining emotional composure, an urge to either move closer or pull away. Why pull away? Because intensity without clarity can feel unsafe. If he cannot immediately categorize what he's feeling, if it doesn't fit into a familiar framework, his nervous system tries to regulate. And regulation often looks like distance. This is why you may notice that right after a deeply intimate moment, eye contact, conversation, laughter, even silence, he withdraws. It's not that the connection disappeared. It's that his system needs to stabilize. Think about it this way. The divine feminine energy tends to process connection through emotion and intuition. The divine masculine often processes through sensation and logic. When sensation becomes overwhelming, logic tries to regain control. So he might tell himself, "It's just chemistry. It's just attraction. I'm overthinking this. This isn't serious." But his body knows it's more. That's the tension you feel. And this is where many misunderstandings begin. Because from the outside, his behavior can look inconsistent. One moment he's fully present, grounded, attentive, drawn toward you. The next moment he seems guarded, distracted, or distant. You might wonder, did I imagine the intensity? Did something change? Did I do something wrong? But what if nothing changed except his nervous system trying to recalibrate? When a twin flame connection activates, especially for the divine masculine, it can trigger stored emotional memory. Not necessarily conscious memory, but cellular memory. Old wounds, unresolved vulnerability, fear of losing control, fear of being seen too deeply, fear of dependency. Because a true twin flame connection doesn't just offer desire. It exposes truth. And exposure activates defense mechanisms. Now here's something important to understand. There's a difference between lust and energetic resonance. Lust feels directional and intentional. It moves towards satisfaction. It has a clear goal. Energetic resonance, however, feels involuntary. Feels like recognition. Feels like gravity. There's no strategy behind it. Just is. And the divine masculine can feel that difference physically. He might notice that being near you affects his body differently than being near anyone else. Maybe he becomes more aware of your presence, more sensitive to your movements, more conscious of his own posture and tone. Maybe he feels protective without reason, or unsettled without explanation. That unsettled feeling is not weakness. It's activation. When polarity aligns between masculine and feminine energies, it creates charge. But charge requires containment. If he hasn't learned how to contain intensity without suppressing it, the nervous system chooses avoidance. That's why you sometimes see the hot and cold dynamic. It's not manipulation in a true twin flame scenario. It's oscillation between activation and regulation. Activation, he feels drawn, open, connected. Regulation, he pulls back to regain control. This oscillation can continue until emotional awareness catches up with physical awareness. And that can take time, especially for someone who was never taught how to interpret vulnerability as strength. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt him physically react to you, even when he was trying to act neutral? Maybe his breath changed when you stood closer. Maybe his voice shifted tone. Maybe his body leaned in before his mind decided to. That's not coincidence. That's nervous system alignment. And alignment is powerful, because the body does not respond that way to everyone. It responds that way to familiarity, to resonance, to something it recognizes at a level deeper than thought. But recognition can feel threatening if it implies change. And twin flame connections imply transformation. They disrupt old patterns. They challenge independence. They awaken suppressed emotion. And the divine masculine may unconsciously understand that allowing this connection means evolving. Evolution feels uncertain. Uncertainty activates survival response. So instead of leaning fully into the intensity, he may instinctively step back. Not because he doesn't feel it, but because he feels it too strongly. This is why it's so important not to interpret every withdrawal as rejection. Sometimes it's simply integration. Sometimes it's his system adjusting to a frequency it hasn't experienced before. And here's another layer most people overlook. The divine masculine may not even realize how strongly his body reacts. He may only be aware of subtle discomfort, restlessness, distraction, an urge to leave when things feel too intimate. But underneath that restlessness is magnetism. The nervous system doesn't activate without stimulus. And twin flame polarity is one of the most intense stimuli the body can experience. It's not comfortable at first. It's electric, raw, unfiltered. And until he understands that intensity is not danger but connection, he may respond with caution. So instead of asking, "Why is he pulling away?" try asking, What might his body be processing right now? Because if you understand the nervous system dynamic, you stop personalizing the behavior. You see it as part of awakening. You see it as a man feeling something his mind hasn't learned how to hold yet. And that changes everything. Sign 1. Sudden physical tension around you. When his body goes rigid before his mind understands why. Now that we understand how the nervous system activates before conscious awareness, let's talk about the first unusual sign. It's subtle. It's easy to misread. And yet it's one of the clearest indicators that the divine masculine feels a deep physical pull toward you. Sudden physical tension. Not anger. Not coldness. Not irritation. Tension. Have you ever noticed how his body changes the moment you enter the room? Maybe he was relaxed before. Casual. Loose. Natural. And then you arrive. His posture straightens. His shoulders square. His jaw tightens slightly. His breathing shifts almost imperceptibly. It's as if his entire body becomes alert. You might interpret this as discomfort. You might think, is he nervous? Did I make him uneasy? Does he feel awkward around me? But what if that tension isn't discomfort? What if it's activation? When the divine masculine feels a strong energetic pull, his body instinctively prepares. For what? For impact. Because twin flame polarity doesn't feel soft at first. Feels powerful, charged, electrifying. And electricity moves through muscle before it reaches language. Let's imagine a simple scenario. You're both sitting across from each other in a casual setting. Maybe it's a cafe. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's a gathering of friends. He's relaxed, talking normally, laughing easily. Then your eyes meet, and something shifts. His laughter softens. His spine straightens. His hands stop moving. For a brief second, he looks almost frozen. That micro-freeze is not rejection. It's recognition. The body recognizes resonance instantly, but recognition requires processing. And processing often begins with tension. Why? Because when attraction is shallow, the body stays relaxed. But when attraction feels significant, when it feels meaningful, layered, deep, the nervous system sharpens focus. His body moves into alertness. Alertness feels like tension. Think about moments in life when something important happens. Before a competition, before a confrontation, before a confession, the body tightens in preparation. Not because it's negative, but because it matters. And that's the key. If he becomes physically composed, almost overly controlled around you, it may not be because he feels nothing. It may be because he feels too much. The divine masculine is often conditioned to maintain control of physical expression. Strong posture, neutral expression, steady tone. So when the twin flame energy disrupts that control even slightly, he compensates. He becomes more rigid, more contained, more self-aware. Have you noticed how some men become unusually quiet around someone who affects them deeply? Not because they have nothing to say, but because they are monitoring themselves, monitoring their reactions, monitoring their breathing, monitoring how much they're revealing. That internal monitoring creates tension in the body, jaw clenching, neck tightening, hands flexing, even subtle fidgeting. And here's something powerful. The divine masculine may not even consciously know why this happens. He may simply feel different around you. More serious, more focused, more intense. He might even interpret it as pressure. But the pressure is coming from within, not from you. Because when polarity activates strongly, his body becomes aware of you in a way it doesn't with others. He notices proximity. He notices scent. He notices micro-movements. He becomes physically aware of your presence in his space. And awareness requires energy. Energy in the body manifests as muscle engagement. Muscle engagement feels like tension. Now let's go deeper. Why would strong attraction create rigidity instead of relaxation? Because relaxation requires safety. And deep attraction feels vulnerable. Vulnerability means exposure. Exposure feels risky. Especially if he hasn't fully accepted how deeply he's affected. Imagine standing next to someone and suddenly feeling a pull in your chest. Not dramatic but undeniable. Your body wants to lean closer. But your mind says, Stay composed. That internal conflict creates tension. Lean in. Stay back. Reveal. Contain. The more powerful the pull, the stronger the containment effort. That's why sometimes the divine masculine appears almost disciplined around you, as if he's holding something back, as if he's bracing himself, because in a way he is. He's bracing against how strongly he feels drawn. And this is where misinterpretation happens. You may think, he seems stiff around me. Maybe he's uncomfortable. But stiffness is often self-regulation. It's the body trying to stabilize intense sensation. Let's explore another example. You stand close enough that your arms almost touch. He shifts slightly, not away but upright. His breath changes. He swallows subtly. He adjusts his jacket or shirt. Why adjust clothing? Because it gives the body something to do. It channels energy outward instead of inward. Small physical adjustments are often grounding techniques. Unconscious ones. The divine masculine might tighten his posture because standing relaxed would allow too much feeling. And too much feeling without clarity can feel overwhelming. This is especially true during early stages of twin flame awareness. Before he understands the depth. Before he accepts the significance. Before he trusts the connection. The body reacts first. Acceptance comes later. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt his energy become stronger when you were close? Even if he wasn't saying anything? Have you felt the silence become heavier? Not awkward. Just charged. That charge is often mirrored in physical tension. Because tension is energy contained. And contained energy is powerful. Now here's an important distinction. Physical tension rooted in fear feels defensive. Physical tension rooted in attraction feels focused. You can sense the difference. Defensive tension creates distance. Focused tension creates intensity. If he maintains proximity while appearing tense, that's not avoidance. That's engagement with restraint. It's like standing at the edge of something profound. You want to step forward, but you're aware that stepping forward changes everything. So you hold still. The divine masculine often holds still before he moves. And in that stillness, the body becomes rigid. Because stillness under intensity requires strength. And strength in the body looks like tension. So instead of asking, why is he stiff around me? Ask, what is he containing? What emotion is trying to rise? What awareness is surfacing? What recognition is forming? Because the body doesn't brace for nothing. It braces for significance. And twin flame connections are significant. They awaken dormant parts of the self. They trigger memory beyond logic. They stir feelings that don't fit neatly into categories. And when something doesn't fit into categories, the nervous system responds with alertness. Alertness feels like tension. So if you notice him becoming more physically composed, more upright, more still, more controlled when you're near, don't immediately interpret it as disinterest. It might be the opposite. It might be the first sign that his body already recognizes the pull, even if his heart hasn't found the words yet. Sign 2. He avoids prolonged eye contact. When looking too long feels like being seen too deeply, there's a moment that happens in many twin flame connections. It's brief. It's silent. But it changes everything. Your eyes meet. And for a second, maybe two, time feels different. Slower. Denser. Charged. Then suddenly he looks away. Quickly. Almost abruptly. And you're left wondering, was that intensity real? Or did I imagine it? Why would someone who feels drawn to you avoid looking at you? Shouldn't attraction make him want more eye contact, not less? Here's the truth that most people misunderstand. In shallow attraction, eye contact is playful. In deep resonance, eye contact is exposing. The divine masculine may avoid prolonged eye contact not because he feels nothing, but because he feels too much. Let's explore why. Eye contact is one of the most vulnerable forms of human connection. It bypasses language. It bypasses logic. It bypasses performance. When two people lock eyes for longer than a few seconds, something primal happens. The nervous system activates. Mirror neurons fire. Heart rate shifts. Breath synchronizes. There's a subconscious exchange of information that words cannot carry. Now imagine that exchange happening with someone who mirrors your soul. with someone whose presence already creates tension in your body, with someone whose energy feels strangely familiar. That's not just eye contact. That's recognition. And recognition can be overwhelming. For the divine masculine, especially one who is not fully conscious of the depth of this connection, prolonged eye contact can feel like losing control. Because in that gaze there is nowhere to hide. He feels seen, not just physically, but emotionally, energetically, internally. And being seen deeply can be terrifying if you are not ready to be known. Have you ever noticed how confident men sometimes struggle to maintain eye contact with the one woman who truly affects them? It's not weakness. It's intensity. Because when eye contact carries depth, it activates vulnerability. And vulnerability feels unfamiliar to someone who has learned to stay composed. Let's paint a scenario. You're standing close enough to feel each other's presence clearly. You say something simple, nothing dramatic. He looks at you. And for a moment his eyes soften. They don't just look at you. They search. They hold. They linger. And then suddenly he breaks it. He glances away. Looks at the floor. Checks his phone. Shifts his gaze to something neutral. Why? Because that softness exposed something. And exposure creates sensation. The divine masculine may feel his chest tighten in that moment. His breath may shift. His mind may go blank. He may feel an urge to move closer and an urge to retreat at the same time. That internal conflict is intense. Eye contact magnifies it. There's something deeply intimate about sustained gaze. It strips away surface interaction. It dissolves distraction. Says without words, I see you. And when twin flame polarity is active, I see you can feel like I recognize you. Recognition carries weight. It implies depth. It implies consequence. It implies change. And change, especially internal change, can feel destabilizing. That's why he may look away. Not because he doesn't want to look, but because looking feels too powerful. There's also a biological layer here. Prolonged eye contact increases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. It increases dopamine, the pleasure neurotransmitter. It heightens emotional attunement. In other words, it deepens connection rapidly. If he senses that depth building faster than he's prepared for, his nervous system may instinctively interrupt it. By breaking the gaze, by creating space, by resetting the intensity. Now ask yourself this. Have you ever felt that when he looks at you, something in him shifts? Maybe his eyes darken slightly. Maybe his expression softens. Maybe he becomes unusually serious. And then, almost like he caught himself, he pulls back. That's self-regulation. It's not indifference. It's containment. Because eye contact in twin flame dynamics is not casual. It's energetic exchange. It's magnetic. And magnetism requires balance. If he's not ready to fully surrender to the pull, he'll interrupt the moment. You might even notice a pattern. He looks intensely when he thinks you're not watching. But when you catch him looking, he turns away quickly. Why? Because when the gaze is mutual, the energy multiplies. Unilateral observation feels safe. Mutual recognition feels intimate. And intimacy without emotional preparedness can feel overwhelming. Here's something even deeper. Eye contact activates the limbic system, the emotional brain. It bypasses rational thought. It connects through feeling. The divine masculine may be more comfortable engaging through logic and structure. But sustained eye contact pulls him into feeling. And feeling deeply can trigger memories, fears, and vulnerabilities he hasn't consciously processed. Especially in a twin flame dynamic. Because this connection doesn't feel random. Feels meaningful. Meaning intensifies gaze. Gaze intensifies awareness. Awareness intensifies emotion. And emotion can feel destabilizing if it surfaces too quickly. So he looks away. But here's the key detail. Avoiding prolonged eye contact is different from avoiding you. If he still stays near. If he still engages. If he still responds to your presence. Then the gaze breaking isn't rejection. It's regulation. It's him managing intensity. There's also a subtle emotional layer to this. When the divine masculine locks eyes with you and feels that pull, he may sense something he cannot yet articulate. It might feel like home, familiarity, depth. desire layered with tenderness. And that combination can feel overwhelming. Desire alone is manageable. Tenderness alone is manageable. But when desire and tenderness mix, that's vulnerability. That's heart-opening. That's transformative. And transformation often begins with discomfort. Have you ever held someone's gaze long enough that words felt unnecessary? That silence felt louder than conversation? That's the kind of moment that makes him look away. Not because he doesn't want it, but because he doesn't yet know how to hold it. There's a difference between a man who avoids eye contact because he feels nothing, and a man who avoids eye contact because he feels everything. The first feels disengaged. The second feels charged. You can sense the difference. Charged avoidance carries electricity. Disengaged avoidance carries emptiness. If the silence between you feels heavy, not hollow, that's activation. And activation is a sign. Now here's a powerful question to reflect on. When he looks away, does he look distant? Or does he look like he's processing? Processing looks like thoughtfulness, like internal movement, like something shifting beneath the surface. Because in those moments something is shifting. Eye contact in twin flame dynamics is like a mirror. And mirrors reveal truth. If he's not fully ready to see himself reflected in you, he may break the gaze. But that doesn't erase the recognition. It just delays the acknowledgement. So the next time your eyes meet and he looks away quickly, don't rush to interpret it as fear of you. It may be fear of how deeply he feels when he sees you. And that distinction changes everything. Sign 3. His voice changes around you. When sound reveals what the heart is trying to hide. There is something incredibly revealing about the human voice. Before words even register in the mind, tone communicates emotion. Pitch communicates nervous system state. Rhythm communicates confidence or the lack of it. And when the divine masculine feels a deep physical pull toward you, his voice may shift in subtle but powerful ways. Not dramatically, not obviously, but noticeably if you pay attention. Have you ever spoken to him on the phone and felt one energy, then spoken to him in person and felt something entirely different? Maybe over text he seems steady, composed, controlled, but in your presence, his voice deepens, or softens, or hesitates, or tightens unexpectedly. Sometimes it even trembles just slightly. Why would that happen? Because the voice is directly connected to the nervous system. When attraction activates his body, the muscles around the throat and diaphragm respond. Breathing changes. And when breathing changes, the voice follows. Let's break this down. When someone feels calm and emotionally neutral, their voice remains steady and consistent. But when someone feels intense emotion, excitement, attraction, anticipation, their vocal tone shifts. It might lower unconsciously to sound grounded. It might become softer, almost intimate. It might crack slightly during vulnerable moments. It might speed up when he's trying to cover nervousness. The key here is contrast. If his voice changes specifically around you and not around others, that's significant, because it means your presence affects him physically. And remember what we said earlier. The divine masculine often experiences twin flame attraction through the body first. So if his body is activated, his voice will reflect it. Imagine this. You're talking casually, maybe about something ordinary, work, daily life, nothing emotional. He responds normally. But then the conversation shifts slightly. You say something playful, or meaningful, or you simply hold eye contact while speaking. Suddenly his tone lowers. His responses become shorter, more deliberate, almost measured. Why? Because when intensity rises, the body tries to contain it, and the voice becomes controlled. Now consider another scenario. He's confident in general, strong presence, stable tone. But when he speaks directly to you, especially in moments of closeness, his voice softens. Not weak, just warmer, less guarded. That warmth is vulnerability leaking through. And vulnerability requires courage. So sometimes he compensates. He might clear his throat unnecessarily, laugh when it's not entirely funny, shift the subject abruptly. Why shift the subject? Because the voice betrayed something. It revealed depth. And depth can feel dangerous if he hasn't processed it yet. Here's something many people overlook. The voice carries emotional truth more honestly than words. A man can say, "It's nothing," but if his voice tightens while saying it, his body disagrees. He can say, "I'm fine," but if his tone drops unexpectedly, there's emotion underneath. The divine masculine may not even realize that his voice changes around you, but you can feel it. There's a difference between speaking from the head and speaking from the chest. When the connection is strong, his voice may shift from cognitive to embodied. It becomes slower, lower, more grounded. Why lower? Because the lower register of the voice is often associated with authenticity and emotional exposure. When attraction deepens, the body moves toward grounding. Grounding deepens tone. But here's the paradox. The same attraction that deepens his voice can also destabilize it. If he feels overwhelmed, his breathing becomes shallow. Shallow breathing tightens the throat. A tightened throat creates tension in sound. So his voice might crack slightly, or he might speak more quickly, or stumble over words unexpectedly. Have you ever noticed him losing his train of thought mid-sentence when you're close? That's cognitive interruption. Strong attraction redirects focus inward. Part of his mind is processing sensation. Part of his mind is trying to stay composed. Split attention affects speech. You might interpret it as distraction, but it could actually be hyper-awareness. Hyper-awareness of you. Another sign within this sign. He may unconsciously mirror your vocal tone. If you speak softly, he lowers his voice. If you speak slowly, he matches your pace. This mirroring happens when there's resonance. When two nervous systems synchronize, that synchronization often feels intimate. And intimacy intensifies the voice. Let's explore the deeper layer. Why does the voice matter so much in twin flame dynamics? Because sound is vibration. And twin flame connections are deeply vibrational. Your nervous system responds not just to what he says, but to how he says it. If you feel warmth when he speaks your name, if you notice a subtle pause before he says something meaningful, if his tone becomes unusually serious during simple conversations, those are not random. They're signals. Signals that his body is engaged. Now let me ask you something. Has he ever sounded different when he's alone with you versus when others are present? That contrast reveals everything. In groups, he may keep his tone neutral, controlled, composed. But alone, the edges soften, or the tension increases. Either way, it changes. Because in private, the mask relaxes, or the intensity amplifies. And both reveal impact. There's another layer here that's rarely discussed. When the divine masculine feels a strong physical pull, his voice may become quieter during intimate moments. Not because he lacks confidence, but because closeness requires subtlety. When two people stand close, volume naturally lowers. Lower volume increases intimacy. Intimacy increases vulnerability. And vulnerability is the threshold he's navigating. You might even notice that when he's trying to hide how he feels, he becomes overly casual. Jokes more. Speaks louder than necessary. Why louder? Because humor and volume create distance from vulnerability. They redirect focus away from what's happening underneath. But if you pay attention to the micro moments, the brief shifts in tone when something meaningful passes between you, that's where the truth lives. The divine masculine's voice can reveal longing before his actions do. Can reveal hesitation before his decisions do. It can reveal desire before he admits it. And sometimes the most powerful sign isn't what he says. It's the pause before he says it. That pause holds energy. It holds thought. It holds emotion trying to find language. Have you ever felt his voice change when he says your name? That's not coincidence. Names carry emotional charge. If he feels something deep, the way he says your name may carry weight. Slower, softer, more intentional, or sometimes almost reluctant, as if speaking it makes the feeling more real. Because sound makes things tangible, and tangibility can be confronting. So if you've noticed shifts in his tone, if you've sensed warmth, tension, hesitation, depth in the way he speaks around you, don't dismiss it. The body speaks through voice long before the ego allows confession. And in twin flame dynamics, confession often comes much later. First comes sensation, then comes awareness, then eventually acknowledgement. Sign 4. He oscillates between closeness and distance, when the magnetic pull feels too strong to sustain. Now we arrive at one of the most misunderstood signs in the twin flame journey, and perhaps the most painful. He comes close. The energy intensifies. The connection feels undeniable. And then suddenly, he pulls away. Not gradually, not gently, but noticeably. You feel the shift. The warmth cools. The messages slow down. The presence feels guarded. And you're left asking yourself, if he feels this deep physical pull, why does he retreat? If the chemistry is real, why create distance? Is this love, or is this confusion? Here's what many people don't understand. Oscillation between closeness and distance is often a nervous system response to intensity. It is not indifference. It is not always manipulation. And in a true twin flame dynamic, it is rarely random. When the divine masculine feels a deep physical pull toward you, it activates two opposing forces within him: the desire to merge and the instinct to maintain control. These forces do not always cooperate. Let's break this down. When he is physically close to you, emotionally, energetically, or literally, the magnetic field between you strengthens. You feel it in the silence, in the eye contact, in the way his body subtly leans in the tension that builds when your hands almost touch. That closeness feels electric. And electricity is powerful. But electricity also requires grounding. If it builds too quickly without stability, it overwhelms the system. And when the system feels overwhelmed, it seeks regulation. For many divine masculine energies, regulation looks like distance. So the pattern becomes connection activation, overwhelm, withdrawal. From your perspective, it can feel like a roller coaster. From his perspective, it feels like survival. Because here's the truth. The twin flame connection doesn't just awaken attraction. It awakens dormant parts of the self. Parts he may have suppressed. Parts he may not fully understand. Parts that challenge the identity he has built. Imagine this. He spends an evening with you. The conversation flows effortlessly. There are moments of stillness that feel heavy. Not awkward but charged. He feels drawn closer physically. His body relaxes in your presence, but also tightens with awareness. He leaves that interaction feeling both exhilarated and unsettled. Exhilarated because the connection feels real. Unsettled because it feels significant. And significance implies responsibility. It implies change. It implies emotional depth. So the next day, instead of moving closer, he becomes quieter. More reserved. Maybe even distant. Why? Because after intense closeness, his nervous system needs space to recalibrate. This is especially true if he has not yet integrated vulnerability into his identity. The divine masculine often associates strength with control, but the twin flame connection feels uncontrollable, feels involuntary, and involuntary emotions can feel destabilizing. So distance becomes a way to restore equilibrium. Now here's the part that hurts. When he withdraws, you may feel abandoned, confused, rejected. But what if his withdrawal isn't a rejection of you? What if it's an attempt to stabilize himself? Let me ask you something. Have you noticed that his distance often follows a moment of deep closeness? Not random, not unrelated, but directly after something meaningful happened? A long conversation, a lingering touch, an intense gaze, a shared vulnerability. Those moments activate something profound. And profound activation requires integration. Integration requires space. This doesn't mean you should accept inconsistency blindly, but it does mean you should understand the pattern before personalizing it. There's a biological explanation for this oscillation. When two people feel strong attraction, dopamine spikes. Dopamine creates excitement, focus, and pleasure. But high dopamine states cannot be sustained indefinitely. The nervous system eventually seeks balance. When dopamine drops, the body shifts into regulation mode. For someone unaccustomed to deep emotional stimulation, that drop can feel confusing, almost like a crash. And instead of leaning back in to reconnect, he may step back further to avoid feeling that intensity again too quickly. This is not about lack of feeling. It's about capacity. Capacity to hold intensity without retreating. Capacity to remain open without shutting down. And capacity develops through awareness and emotional maturity. Until then, oscillation may continue. Let's go deeper. Closeness requires surrender. Distance restores autonomy. If he feels that being close to you makes him emotionally dependent, even slightly, his instinct may be to reassert independence. Not because he doesn't value you, but because he fears losing himself. The twin flame dynamic often mirrors attachment patterns. If he has an avoidant tendency, strong attraction may trigger distancing behaviors. Not consciously, but reflexively. And this is where it becomes confusing, because when he is close, he is fully present. The connection feels undeniable. You see it in his eyes. You feel it in his body language. You sense it in his voice. And then, just when you begin to relax into it, he pulls back. That pullback is often his nervous system saying, "This is powerful. Slow down." But instead of saying those words aloud, his behavior communicates it. Now consider this question. Does he return? Because in a twin flame dynamic, the pull doesn't disappear. Even after distance, even after silence, even after attempts to detach. If the connection is genuine, he feels the magnetic field again. And eventually he gravitates back. That return reveals something important. The distance wasn't about absence of feeling. It was about managing intensity. Oscillation is often a sign that he feels the depth, but hasn't fully integrated it. If he felt nothing, he would simply disengage permanently. But if he keeps circling back, that reveals magnetism. And magnetism cannot be faked. Here's another subtle layer. Sometimes he creates distance to test his own feelings, to see if the pull fades, to see if it was just attraction. But instead of fading, the pull often strengthens during separation. Because absence amplifies awareness, and awareness deepens longing. So he may find himself thinking about you more during the very space he created to escape the intensity. That internal contradiction creates confusion, which can lead to another cycle of closeness followed by distance, until eventually clarity emerges. But clarity takes time. Now here's something crucial. You cannot regulate his nervous system for him. You cannot chase him into stability. You cannot force him to stay close if he is overwhelmed. What you can do is remain grounded, centered, non-reactive. Because your grounded presence actually stabilizes the field between you. When you respond to his distance with panic, the polarity destabilizes further. When you respond with calm confidence, the energy remains balanced. And balance reduces fear. So the next time he oscillates between closeness and distance, ask yourself, is this inconsistency, or is this integration in progress? Does his distance feel cold, or does it feel like processing? Because there's a difference. Cold distance feels detached. Processing distance feels thoughtful. If he withdraws but still watches. If he steps back but still returns. If he creates space but never fully breaks the connection. That's not absence. That's someone learning how to hold intensity. And holding intensity is part of awakening. Sign 5. Heightened sensory awareness around you. When his body notices you before his mind admits it. Some signs are loud. Oscillation between closeness and distance is obvious. A change in voice can be detected. Physical tension is visible. But this sign, it's quieter, more subtle. And yet, it may be one of the strongest indicators that the divine masculine feels a deep physical pull toward you. Heightened sensory awareness. Not just attraction. Not just noticing that you're attractive. But noticing you in ways that feel almost instinctive. Have you ever felt like he becomes hyper-aware of you when you're nearby? Even when he's pretending not to be. Maybe you walk into a room and he doesn't immediately look at you, but his body reacts. He shifts slightly, straightens, adjusts his posture. His breathing changes. And then seconds later his eyes follow. As if his body detected your presence before his mind consciously registered it. That's not coincidence. That's sensory activation. When the divine masculine feels a deep physical pull, his senses become sharper around you. He may notice the sound of your voice across a room, the rhythm of your footsteps, the scent you wear, the way your hand moves when you speak, the subtle shifts in your mood. He may not comment on these details. He may not even realize he's tracking them, but his body is. Because attraction at this level isn't just visual. It's biological. Let's talk about proximity. Have you ever noticed how he positions himself in space around you? Not obviously invading your space, but just close enough. Close enough to feel your presence. Close enough to sense warmth. Close enough to notice your breathing. And when someone else steps between you, he subtly adjusts to regain alignment. This is not random movement. Subconscious calibration. The body seeks what it resonates with. When two nervous systems feel connected, they orient toward each other. Even without conversation. You might see it in small moments. Standing in a group, his body angled slightly toward you. Feet pointed in your direction. Shoulders subtly aligned. These are unconscious signs of engagement. Now let's go deeper. Have you ever accidentally brushed hands? And the reaction felt amplified? Not dramatic, but charged. As if that tiny contact carried more weight than it should. When sensory awareness is heightened, even small touches feel electric. And electricity travels through skin quickly. His hand might linger half a second longer than necessary. Or he might pull away quickly, almost startled by the intensity. That startled reaction doesn't mean rejection. It means sensation registered strongly. The divine masculine may become hyper-aware of touch when he feels drawn, because touch makes the connection real. It grounds the energy in the physical world. And grounding can feel intense when the emotional layer hasn't fully integrated yet. There's also the layer of scent. Scent is deeply connected to memory and bonding. The olfactory system links directly to the limbic brain, the emotional center. If he feels a strong pull, he may become unusually aware of how you smell. Not in a superficial way, but in a way that feels grounding, familiar, comforting. He may stand closer unconsciously just to remain within that sensory field. He may not know why being near you feels calming and stimulating at the same time, but his body does. Now ask yourself, have you ever caught him watching you when he thought you weren't looking? Not staring aggressively, but observing, taking in details. The way you laugh, the way your hair moves, the way your expression changes when you're thinking. This kind of observation is not casual interest. It's imprinting. When someone feels deep attraction, especially in twin flame dynamics, the brain begins to encode details more intensely. Because the nervous system labels the person as significant. Significance sharpens perception. He may remember small things you said weeks ago, tiny preferences, offhand comments. Why? Because his sensory awareness stored them. He may not consciously decide to remember, but he does. There's also something else that happens. When the divine masculine feels this pull, he may sense shifts in your energy. Before you speak, before you explain, he might ask, "Are you okay?" Even when you haven't said anything. He might notice your mood change instantly. That sensitivity is not typical casual attraction. It's attunement. Attunement happens when two nervous systems synchronize. Synchronization heightens sensory awareness. And heightened awareness feels intimate. This is where it becomes unusual. Because sometimes he will act detached, yet his body remains aware. He might avoid direct conversation, but he still notices when you enter the room. He might try to maintain distance, but he senses when you leave. Have you ever felt him look up exactly when you glanced at him? As if something invisible alerted him? That's resonance. The body can detect subtle shifts in presence, especially when there's emotional charge attached. Now let's explore a deeper layer. Heightened sensory awareness can also feel destabilizing, because when you become hyper-aware of someone, it's hard to ignore them, even when you try. If he attempts to distract himself, your voice may cut through noise more clearly than others. If he attempts to focus elsewhere, your movement may draw his attention effortlessly. That involuntary attention can feel frustrating if he's trying to remain composed, which may lead him to suppress visible reaction. But suppression does not eliminate awareness, simply hides it. You might notice tension when you stand too close. Not defensive tension, but contained intensity. He becomes acutely aware of space, of inches, of boundaries, because proximity amplifies sensation, and sensation requires regulation. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like he could sense you before he saw you? Maybe you walk into a room quietly, yet he turns his head. Or you think about him and moments later he reaches out. This kind of sensory connection goes beyond logic. It enters energetic territory. When polarity is strong, awareness can become almost intuitive. Not psychic in a fantasy sense, but biologically attuned. And that attunement often feels surprising, even to him. He may not understand why he feels restless when you're upset, or calmer when you're relaxed, or distracted when you're near. But his nervous system is responding to yours. This is not something that happens with everyone. That's what makes it significant. Heightened sensory awareness signals that your presence is registered as important. The body prioritizes what matters, and priority shows up as attention. Now here's something important. This awareness does not always mean readiness. He may notice everything about you, yet still struggle to move forward, because awareness and integration are not the same. He can feel the pull deeply. He can sense you strongly. He can notice every subtle detail, and still need time to process what it means. But if you observe heightened sensory awareness consistently, if he becomes subtly oriented toward you, if small touches feel amplified, if he senses your energy shifts instinctively, those are not random signs. They reveal that his body is engaged. And when the body is engaged, awakening has already begun. When the physical pull continues even in absence. By now, you've seen how the divine masculine's body reacts in your presence. Tension, shifts in voice, oscillation between closeness and distance, heightened sensory awareness. But what happens when you're not physically together? Does the pull fade? Or does it intensify in new ways? This is where things become even more unusual. Because when the connection is truly deep, the physical response doesn't disappear with distance. In some cases it grows stronger. Let's explore the next 4 signs. Sign 6. Instant protective instinct. Even without commitment. There's something almost primal about this one. The divine masculine may not have labeled the relationship. He may not have expressed his feelings openly. He may even be trying to maintain emotional distance. And yet, if he senses you're uncomfortable, threatened, or hurt, something in him activates instantly. His posture changes. His voice deepens. His attention sharpens. It's not dramatic dominance. It's instinct. Protective instinct is rooted in biology. When a man feels deeply drawn to someone at a nervous system level, his body often shifts into guardian mode without conscious decision. You might see it in subtle moments. Someone speaks to you disrespectfully, and his jaw tightens. You mention feeling unwell, and he becomes unusually attentive. You're walking in a crowded place, and he instinctively positions himself slightly closer. He may not even understand why he feels responsible for your safety, especially if he hasn't committed emotionally. But the body doesn't wait for labels. It responds to attachment. Protectiveness doesn't always mean possession. In healthy twin flame dynamics, it means attunement. He feels connected to your well-being, even if he hasn't fully admitted how deeply. Have you ever noticed him react strongly when someone else shows interest in you? Not necessarily jealous in an immature way, but alert, aware, slightly tense. That reaction is territorial instinct emerging before conscious acceptance of emotion. Because when the body recognizes significance, it also recognizes potential loss. And loss activates protection. Sign 7. Physical triggering during separation. Now let's move into something even more revealing. When you're apart, when there's silence, when there's distance, does he become physically unsettled? The twin flame dynamic often intensifies during separation. Not because the connection weakens, but because absence removes distraction. And without distraction, the body feels what it was suppressing. You might notice that during no-contact periods, he reaches out unexpectedly. He reacts emotionally to something small. He appears restless. Why restless? Because unresolved attraction doesn't disappear. It becomes internalized. The body remembers the sensation of being near you, the warmth, the tension, the synchronization. And when that disappears abruptly, the nervous system feels the absence. Absence creates craving. Craving creates agitation. Agitation may show up as insomnia, overthinking, irritability, sudden urges to check in, emotional waves without clear explanation. He may not connect these states to you consciously, but the timing often reveals the truth. Have you ever felt him reappear right when you began detaching? That's not always coincidence. When the energetic field shifts, when you stop focusing on him, the polarity recalibrates, and he may suddenly feel the gap. The absence of your attention can trigger the body's recognition of loss. Loss activates desire. Desire activates pursuit, even if subtle. Sign 8. Vivid sensory dreams. Dreams are one of the most overlooked signs of physical pull, because dreams bypass ego. They bypass logic. They bypass control. If the divine masculine dreams about you, not abstractly but vividly, that's significant. Dreams that involve touch, warmth, eye contact, conversations that feel real, moments that feel emotionally intense. The body doesn't invent sensory detail without emotional charge. During waking hours, he may suppress awareness, but during sleep, suppression relaxes, and the subconscious surfaces what's unresolved. If the connection is deep, you may even feel this simultaneously. Have you ever woken up thinking about him intensely, and later discovered he had been thinking about you too? That synchronicity isn't fantasy. It's emotional resonance continuing beyond physical proximity. Dreams can also act as integration. If he's struggling to process the depth of attraction consciously, the subconscious will attempt to resolve it symbolically. Through imagery, through touch, through closeness. The body relives what it misses, and longing in dreams often signals suppressed emotion in waking life. Sign 9. His body reacts before he sees you. This one is subtle but powerful. Have you ever felt him sense you before visual confirmation? You walk into a space quietly. He turns. You think about reaching out. He texts. You glance at him from across the room. He looks up at the exact moment. These moments can feel almost mysterious, but at a biological level, they are about attunement. When two nervous systems are connected deeply, subtle cues become amplified. The body picks up shifts in the environment, changes in energy, tiny sounds, even shifts in emotional atmosphere. He may not consciously know he's reacting, but he is. The divine masculine may feel a sudden shift in mood, then realize you're nearby. He may feel warmth in his chest, then see you. He may feel alert without knowing why, until your presence registers. This preconscious reaction reveals depth, because ordinary attraction doesn't create that level of attunement. Now let's step back and look at the bigger picture. What do these 4 signs have in common? They reveal that the connection lives in the body, not just in thought, not just in emotion, but in instinct, protective instinct, separation triggering, dream state processing, preconscious awareness. These are not surface-level reactions. They indicate that the nervous system has encoded you as significant, and significance doesn't fade easily. But here's the important reminder. Physical pull does not automatically equal readiness. He may feel everything intensely and still need time. Time to integrate, time to understand, time to align emotionally with what his body already knows. And this is where patience becomes powerful. Not passive waiting, but grounded presence. Because when you remain centered, the energetic field stabilizes. And stabilization reduces fear. When desire feels like destiny, and destiny feels like loss of control. By now you've seen the signs. The tension, the gaze, the voice shifts, the oscillation between closeness and distance, the heightened sensory awareness, the protective instinct, the triggering during separation, the dreams, the preconscious reactions. At this point, a deeper question emerges. If he feels this physical pull so strongly, why does he resist it? Why does something that feels magnetic also feel threatening? Why would someone run from what feels like home? Here's the truth most people don't talk about. The divine masculine doesn't fear attraction. He fears transformation. Because this pull, the one you've been sensing, is not casual. It's not optional. It's not convenient. Feels fated. And fate disrupts control. Let's go deeper. Ordinary attraction is manageable. It fits into existing identity. I like her. I'm interested. I'm attracted. Simple. Contained. Predictable. But twin flame attraction doesn't feel simple. Feels destabilizing. Because it awakens parts of him that were dormant. Parts he may have buried under logic, ambition, independence, or emotional self-protection. When he feels this physical pull, it doesn't just activate desire. It activates memory. Not necessarily conscious memory, but emotional memory. Of vulnerability. Of longing. Of intimacy. Of needing someone deeply. And needing someone deeply challenges the masculine ego. The ego prefers self-sufficiency, control, autonomy. But the twin flame pull whispers something different. You are not separate. That realization can feel beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Because if he allows himself to feel how deeply he's drawn, he must also face what it means. It means caring. It means risking rejection. It means risking loss. It means being seen fully. And being seen fully is the most vulnerable position a human can occupy. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever felt that he looks at you like he recognizes something but then immediately builds a wall? That wall isn't built because the feeling is weak. It's built because the feeling is powerful. Power demands response. And response requires courage. The divine masculine often struggles with the idea that he cannot control this pull. He didn't choose it logically. He didn't strategize it. It happened. It rose. It activated. And when something activates without conscious decision, it feels threatening to the ego. Because the ego likes to believe it is in charge. Twin flame energy bypasses the ego. It speaks directly to the nervous system and the heart. And when the body responds before the mind approves, control feels compromised. Imagine being a man who has mastered composure, who prides himself on rational thinking, who makes decisions carefully. And then suddenly one person disrupts that equilibrium. Your breath changes around her. Your thoughts blur when she's near. Your sleep shifts when she's distant. You feel protective without understanding why. You feel drawn without strategy. That kind of pull forces introspection. And introspection often reveals unhealed parts. Childhood wounds. Fear of abandonment. Fear of inadequacy. Fear of losing independence. The twin flame dynamic mirrors not just love, but shadow. And shadow work is uncomfortable. So instead of leaning into transformation, he may attempt to minimize the connection. Rationalize it. Label it just attraction. Convince himself it's temporary. But the body doesn't cooperate with denial. If the physical pull persists, no amount of mental dismissal erases it. That's where fear deepens. Because the more he tries to suppress it, the more undeniable it becomes. Now let's address something important. Not every intense connection is a twin flame. And not every hot and cold dynamic is spiritual. There is a difference between trauma bonding and divine polarity. Trauma bonds are rooted in chaos, inconsistency, and emotional manipulation. Divine polarity is rooted in recognition, depth, and transformation. How can you tell the difference? Trauma bonds feel draining. Twin flame polarity feels awakening. Even when painful. Trauma bonds create addiction without growth. Twin flame connections force growth whether wanted or not. If his distance feels calculated and cruel, that's not awakening. But if his distance feels like someone wrestling internally with intensity, that's different. Because wrestling implies awareness. Awareness implies significance. Now let's talk about another layer of fear. The fear of destiny. When something feels random, you can walk away easily. When something feels destined, walking away feels heavier. He may sense that allowing this connection means stepping into a different version of himself. A more open version. A more emotionally integrated version. And transformation requires surrender. Surrender feels like loss. Loss of old identity. Loss of emotional armor. Loss of familiar patterns. And the divine masculine may cling to familiarity even when it feels empty. Simply because it's known. The unknown, even if beautiful, feels risky. So he hesitates. He pulls back. He analyzes. He creates distance to see if the pull fades. But often the distance makes the pull clearer. Because when you remove proximity and the longing remains, that's when denial becomes impossible. Have you ever felt that he seems more affected during separation than during closeness? That's because closeness can distract him with sensation. Separation forces him to feel. And feeling deeply without distraction can be confronting. Now here's the paradox. The very thing he fears is the thing he seeks. He fears losing control, but he longs for depth. He fears vulnerability, but he desires intimacy. He fears transformation, but he is tired of surface-level connection. This internal conflict creates tension, and tension creates resistance. But resistance cannot erase recognition. Recognition lingers. It returns. It surfaces in dreams, in sudden thoughts, in unexpected urges to reconnect. The divine masculine may fear this pull because it exposes truth, and truth dissolves illusions. Illusions of independence, illusions of emotional invulnerability, illusions of detachment. And once illusions dissolve, there is no going back to who he was before meeting you. That realization alone can be overwhelming. So if you've wondered, why does he act like he feels it, but refuses to admit it? Understand this. Admission is not just about confession. It's about acceptance of transformation. And transformation is a process, not an instant decision. Inspirational closing. When the body knows before the mind is ready, and why your power is in staying centered. After everything we've explored, the tension, the gaze, the voice shifts, the oscillation, the sensory awareness, the protective instinct, the separation triggers, the dreams, the fear, there is one final truth we need to anchor into. The divine masculine may feel the pull physically before he can admit it emotionally. But your journey is not about forcing him to catch up. It's about remaining grounded while he integrates. This is where many twin flame connections either mature or collapse. Because once you recognize the signs, once you see that his body reacts, that his nervous system activates, that his distance may be processing rather than rejection, it becomes tempting to focus entirely on him. To analyze every move. To decode every silence. To measure every glance. But here's the deeper invitation. If his body already knows, if his nervous system already responds, if the magnetism is real, then chasing confirmation is unnecessary. Because what is real does not need to be hunted. It unfolds. The divine masculine runs from what he cannot master. But he always returns to what feels like home. And home is not obsession. Home is resonance. When he feels that physical pull toward you, something ancient inside him recognizes familiarity. But familiarity doesn't mean readiness. Recognition doesn't mean integration. And intensity doesn't mean timing. This is where your strength becomes crucial. Because the divine feminine energy, when embodied consciously, stabilizes the field. If he oscillates between closeness and distance, your power lies in not oscillating with him. If he pulls back to regulate, your grounding prevents escalation. If he fears transformation, your calm presence makes transformation feel safer. Let's shift perspective for a moment. Instead of asking, when will he admit it? Ask, am I centered in myself regardless of his timeline? Because twin flame dynamics are not about chasing union. They are about embodying wholeness. When you remain centered, something interesting happens. The magnetic field balances. Intensity softens into stability. And fear diminishes. Not because you changed him, but because you stopped reacting to his fear. There's a quiet power in that. The kind of power that doesn't demand reassurance. The kind of power that doesn't collapse when distance appears. The kind of power that says, I see what you're feeling, and I trust the process. Have you ever noticed that when you detach from anxiety, he moves closer? That's not coincidence. When you release pressure, the nervous system between you stabilizes. When you stop chasing, the polarity realigns. When you remain grounded, his fear decreases. Because fear feeds on instability, and instability dissolves in presence. Now let's be honest. This journey is not always easy. There will be moments when his silence feels heavy, when his distance feels personal, when you question whether the pull is mutual. But remember what you've witnessed. The tension in his body, the way his voice shifts, the way he senses you before he sees you, the protective instinct that rises automatically, the dreams that bypass logic. These are not imaginary. They are somatic truth. The body does not react this way without meaning, and meaning unfolds in stages. The divine masculine awakening is rarely loud. It's subtle, internal, layered. He may sit alone trying to rationalize why you affect him so deeply. He may analyze conversations long after they've ended. He may try to convince himself it's just attraction. But attraction doesn't trigger transformation. This does. And transformation is slow, but powerful. Here's what most people miss. You cannot accelerate someone else's awakening, but you can embody your own. When you stop focusing on whether he feels it, and instead focus on how you show up, everything shifts. Because the twin flame dynamic is not about proving connection. It's about evolving through it. If he feels the physical pull, that is the beginning. Not the conclusion. The beginning of awareness. The beginning of internal conflict. The beginning of confronting vulnerability. And when a man confronts vulnerability consciously, he either integrates or he retreats permanently. But integration is far more likely when the feminine energy remains calm rather than reactive. Let me ask you something important. Are you seeking proof of his feelings, or are you honoring your own? Because the real power in this journey is not in decoding him. It's in trusting yourself. Trusting what you feel. Trusting what you sense. Trusting that if the magnetism is mutual, it does not disappear simply because fear appears. Fear is temporary. Recognition is not. The divine masculine may run from intensity, but he cannot run from resonance. Resonance lives in the body. It echoes. It lingers. It returns. So instead of trying to force clarity, allow clarity to emerge naturally. Instead of demanding confession, embody confidence. Instead of reacting to distance, remain steady. Because steady energy invites safety, and safety allows him to soften. And when he softens, he begins to integrate what his body already knows. This is not about waiting passively. It's about standing powerfully, about living fully, about continuing your growth whether he catches up tomorrow or months from now. Because your evolution does not pause for his processing. And here's the most empowering truth of all. You are not here to convince someone of your worth. If he feels the physical pull, it's because your energy resonates with his at a deep level. That resonance exists independent of his fear, independent of timing, independent of words. The body does not lie. But the ego can delay acknowledgement, and acknowledgement arrives when fear dissolves. So hold this perspective as you move forward. If he feels it physically, awakening has begun. If he fears it, transformation is near. If he distances, integration is happening. And if he returns, it's because resonance never left. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these signs have you experienced? Have you felt that silent magnetic tension? Have you noticed his voice shift, his posture change, his gaze break too quickly? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story may help someone else navigating the same confusion. And if this video resonated with you, if it helped you see the connection from a deeper perspective, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. In our next video, we'll explore something even more revealing. How the divine masculine processes desire in silence. And what happens internally when he finally stops running. Until then, stay grounded, stay centered, and remember, the one who feels like home will always find his way back. Not through force, but through recognition.